الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء المرسلين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته to everyone. Where are we? We're doing the Munfarijah today. And the last few couplets that we covered were فَلَرُبَّةَ مَا فَاضَ الْمَحْيَا بِبُحُورِ الْمَوْجِ مِنَ اللُّجَجِ. He said that sometimes life comes forth with teeming oceans that start off as waves. This idea that waves are beautiful from a distance, but also they can both cause the creation of lead to the creation of life and the spread of life, and also to destruction. And he says this is the nature of how our life is, that it's we face difficulties in our life, but actually that's part of the spread and the building block of life itself, that through tribulation sometimes there needs to be tribulation in order for us to appreciate other aspects of life. And that for every answer, I guess, for every request that we make to God, every prayer that we make for ourselves, that if we feel like it's not being answered for us, there may be somebody else that it is being answered for. So going back to one of his early couplets, this idea that if we prayed that we prayed to God for it to stop raining, there's another community out there somewhere that are praying to God that it does rain. So one man's curse is another man's life force. So he says, فَلَرُبَّةَ مَا فَاضَ الْمَحْيَا, and sometimes life comes forth in this way, in بِبُحُورِ الْمَوْجِ مِنَ اللُّجَجِ, just as you find the oceans are given life to by the crashing of waves, and those crashes of the waves are like the turbulence that you find in our life. That every crash of that wave takes away from the stillness and the serenity of the landscape, and the calmness and the control that we have in our life. And that's how we sometimes want it to be, but actually those waves are required in order for things to keep moving, for life to continue, and for the very ocean to be the way it is, for our life to be the way it is. And then he moves on to وَنُزُولُهُمُ وَطُلُوعُهُمُ فَعَلَى دَرَكٍ وَعَلَى دَرَجِ, which is about purpose. And he says وَنُزُولُهُمُ, and being struck down, meaning whether that wave is for you on that one occasion a destructive wave, whether it harms you or whether you gain from it, whether you seem to be whether you're on the receiving end of the blessing, regardless of which of those it is, you're not judged by the calamity that befalls you. You're judged by the response you have to that calamity, just like you are judged by not the good things that you receive in life, but how you respond to those good things. So it's easy for us to think somehow we deserve the good things that we've got in life, and that they are almost the reward that we have for the work that we've done. But in actual fact, that's simply just not true. That what we have is just our test, and actually by God testing us with wealth, it's through the mercy of God. He tests us with the thing that he believes we'll be able to cope with. So if we've got that, then actually it's not a sign that God loves us. It's a test for us to be able to use it appropriately. And similarly, if somebody is afflicted with hardship, with financial hardship, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't hate them. That's their test. Their test is, can you find God, and can you direct yourself towards God, and can you have faith and trust in God, tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your time of tribulation, or are you going to give up on God? That's the test for us. فَعَلَى دَرَكٍ وَعَلَى دَرَجِ, and he says each of these is either will raise you up or it will debase you. So either through your calamity you will be elevated, and through your time of ease you will be debased. That could happen. Or you can make it that each of these that you receive, that you elevated through them. So through the benefit that you have in this life, you make it a source of a ladder through which you climb up towards God, rather than the other way around. And And then I mentioned last week that in Surah Mulk begins in this way, where it reminds us, الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. That God tells us, and in other places he says something similar, that he created life and he created death. Allah created existence لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ, so that he may test us, which of us is best indeed. وَهُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْغَفُورُ, and Allah is the one who possesses all izzah. He is Al-Aziz, but he's also Al-Ghafur. He's the one who overlooks and forgives. So there's a real the Shaykh is emphasizing here that, look, we're not perfect and we do fall, but the important thing is that human beings are not judged by our capacity to make mistake. That's not how we're judged. Allah will not take us to task for the number of mistakes we made. He will take us to task for every time we didn't turn back to Allah when we made a mistake. If God wanted creatures that would never err, then he would have kept the angels on the earth, and he would not have had created man. When the angels asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they the Quran tells us they turned to God and said, are you going to create a being that's going to cause destruction on the earth? They say, are you going to create, yasfikuna dima, they say, they will call fasad on the earth, and they will yasfikuna dima means, and they will spread bloodshed. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the angels, inni a'lamu ma la ta'lamun, that I know something you don't know. I know something that you don't know. That in the capacity to be able to sin, we also have been created with the ability to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in hardship, do we have this ability to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? In times of sin, it becomes a chance for us to turn to God. And this is a great blessing itself for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that he's created the ability for us to feel regret. Yeah, regret's a very painful thing to be able to live through when you feel regret. And it's a spectrum. There are certain things that we become accustomed to regretting. It becomes almost like just a routine. So there are certain sins that have become just a daily routine for us, that we've just accepted it and we just feel the regret and we move on. And that's not healthy. But the fact that it's there is what we're going to be judged on, because it was always there. God created within us the ability to sin, yes, but also the ability to turn back to God. That sense of regret is absolutely critical, and we should not allow that spark to die. And one of the conditions of repentance, of tawbah, is that you have to first and foremost stop doing whatever it is that you're doing that's wrong. You've got to stop. And then the second thing that you've got to do is you've got to feel a sense of remorse. Because if you have no remorse, then you can't move on to that third stage of sincerely asking God for forgiveness, or sincerely asking the person that you've wronged for forgiveness. And if it's something that, if you've wronged somebody as opposed to wronging God directly, then actually one of the other conditions is that you have to turn to that person and seek their forgiveness. So it's not just going to God as if he'll wipe the slate clean and it doesn't matter how we make other people feel. There is a responsibility for us to turn to the people that we've hurt and ask their forgiveness. Now, there are certain instances where that's not possible, and where that happens, you've got to exercise your own judgment, but do it in the cold of night when you're on your own, and ask yourself your heart for a fatwa. That, am I doing this because I'm just afraid? Do I not want to? Am I not asking them for forgiveness because I'm afraid, or because my pride's getting in the way, or because I'm too arrogant? Or is it because it's not going to be, it's genuinely, I don't believe it's going to be productive, that it may cause more animosity, that it may lead to more friction? And if it's that sort of thing, then that's when you turn to Allah and then you sincerely repent, because that sense of remorse is already there then, because you want to ask for forgiveness from that person or those people, but you can't for other obstacles that are there. So in those instances, we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we ask him for forgiveness, and the hope that they won't be taking us to task on the day of judgment, because that's what's going to happen. For every person that we've wronged, anybody, that's not just Muslims and non-Muslims, they can take us to task for the way we've wronged them, and they can bear witness against us for the wrongs that we've committed against them. So we've got to be careful that we're not in the pursuit of God, that we've managed to forget that actually we were created as a nation that stem from the same cell, the same nafs. Allah tells us we are created from a single soul, but I've made you into qaba'il, I created you into tribes and groups, and tribes here means that people, tribes means differences, be it ethnicities, be it, of course, gender, be it religions, all of these different, be your experiences, the cultures that you've been brought up in. God says that I split you into all of these groups, and the purpose was that you get to know one another, right? So the Quran tells us to get to know people that are different to us or appear to be different, because you can learn from them. And also within that is this idea of lita'arafu, means that you engage with people. So so we are social creatures by creation. That's the way we were made. We need contact, we need to be around people. So therefore we can't forget that aspect, that in part of the contract of being a social creature is that the implicit contract that we all sign up to is that I will not harm you if you don't harm me. And providing we live up to that implicit contract, then we can be associates. And if that goes well for us, then we can become friends. And if that goes well for us, then we can become very close friends. So it's an implicit contract that we all sign up to. But the flip side of that, the reverse of that, is that actually if I harm you, then there's an implicit contract, social contract, that I will try to rectify that. Yeah, and the reason why I say it's an implicit contract is because if all society functioned on every time we harmed somebody, that we saw it as we just cut off ties with them, then society would not maximize its utility of the society, of the group, because we would eventually all hurt people from time to time. And if every time we hurt somebody we just cut them off, or we refuse to ask for forgiveness, or to at least make an effort to make amends, then very quickly we'd be on our own. And then what you'd end up with is a as the saying goes, water everywhere, not a drop to drink. That you'd have people would be everywhere but not a friend in sight. There would be the power of the community would just not we wouldn't be able to harness it. We wouldn't be able to live up to the Quranic this injunction of liyata'arafu, so that you get to know one another and you can learn from one another, and you can be and Allah also tells us this idea that when you have companionship, Allah says to create mawadda and rahma, which he talks about the spouse, but actually it's not restricted just to the spouse. These ideas of mawadda means to have an intimate friendship, have a close friendship where you can share your secrets with somebody, your vulnerabilities, because that's what makes us human. And actually somebody who lives a life of complete mental isolation or psychological isolation, where we cannot share, and men are probably worse at this than women are, although I don't know what that's an assumption, and it's a kind of, it seems to be an agreed upon assumption stroke fact. Men are not as good at it as women are, but men do it. We're just more probably particular about who we do that with. And we in order to maintain, I suppose, the bravado of men is that if we can just dissect this vulnerability into small enough chunks that it's not recognized by the people around us, then what we do is we share bits of it with enough people and maintain control, which is this idea that nobody knows that I've got this off my chest, because I've kind of divided it up into so many small chunks, and I've shared it with so many different people that people are not you don't see it. So it can be, and the way we mask that is we mask that with comedy. We can mask that with almost even mocking, and becoming, in some cases, become very insensitive to other people's situations. That's how sometimes that bravado kind of manifests itself. It takes a lot longer. Women, without a doubt, mature much quicker than men. As a father, I can say that my daughter's 2 years older, and I've seen that she's probably matured more in those 2 years than my boys who took a lot longer. It's just fascinating how that works. I know you're looking at me now thinking, yeah, okay, it's my son sitting there, Bakr, who just heard me say that. But they grow into themselves. So so there's no doubt that the girls tend to mature a lot quicker, which is where men get better over time, but it takes a lot longer for them to be able to. So your 20-year-old male is not the same as your 20-year-old female in terms of their willingness to share to share a part of themselves. Social media has actually made it a lot more accessible, but I don't think it's made it accessible in a very healthy way. It can be, but it's not necessarily the most healthy way to do it, because social media is what it's done is it's created an unknown. It's what you do is you can like everybody's your friend and nobody is, because you can take away the, it's a friend without a face. And what that does is it creates a degree of comfort, a comfort blanket, because you're not looking at somebody when you're sharing. So that allows for you to be more vulnerable, because it means there's no one person looking back at you. And that can be okay. I mean, it's a good outlet for some people, but it's not always the most healthy. Meaning, and what I mean by that is that shouldn't replace having a face that you can share with. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing at all, I don't think. But it's probably not the topic for today. But there has to be someone that we can share with. And the other thing I would say just on that is it's very easy. The time when men become a bit more open to sharing is when they are friends with women, and what they find is that actually it's easier, and it's a kind of a bit of an in the sense that you can get a lot closer. If the way you gain secrets is by sharing secrets, isn't it? So you've got to share a bit of yourself to be able to receive something of somebody else, and that itself can be problematic too, because the trade-off there is, yes, you get an outlet, but also what you've done is that you've allowed somebody else in who and that can raise problems if you in terms of if you become attracted to them, and if you want to marry them and you don't have the means to be able to marry them, or if it creates feelings and it's one-sided, it's not mutual. These things are quite common, and it happens, which is why Islam is quite conservative in that respect, in that there has to be certain barriers that we have in place to prevent these sorts of things happening, because we're social creatures, and we interact, and we love, and we fall in love. It's just the way we are. We're built that way, so you have to be a machine to think that's not going to happen to you. So there are certain barriers that Islam puts in place, but nonetheless, for men, we need to learn, and women also, those who don't do it, is we need to learn to be able to we need to have a friend or friends that we can sit down with, and we can talk to, and we can be honest, and we can let down some of that facade, and we can speak honestly with them. And that what that does is it lifts a great burden off your shoulders, and it allows you to be a bit more free, and actually allows you to mature a bit quicker, which is, I think, definitely we're lacking. وَنُزُولُهُمْ وَطُلُوعُهُمْ فَعَلَى دَرَكٍ وَعَلَى دَرَجِ. So don't let your calamities, your hardships, your difficulties be the cause of your destruction, your downfall. See them as a chance for you to be elevated spiritually towards God. So take whatever difficulty that comes in this world as a way of elevating you in the hereafter. That's the way we should be approaching these things. And today I want to talk about another two couplets, inshallah. The first one is, this is the 9th couplet, and I've called this design. وَمَعَايِشُهُمْ وَمَعَاقِبُهُمْ لَيْسَتْ فِي الْمَشْيِ عَلَى عِوَجِ. So وَمَعَايِشُهُمْ وَمَعَاقِبُهُمْ لَيْسَتْ فِي الْمَشْيِ عَلَى عِوَجِ. وَمَعَايِشُهُم, what does ma'ayish mean? Ma'ayish means is the dunya. وَمَعَايِشُهُم وَمَعَاقِبُهُم, if I translated it, would be, and both وَمَعَايِشُهُم, and both their living, their life, their works in this world, the things that you do in this world. وَمَعَاقِبُهُم, and your ma'aqib comes from the word aqib, which means after. مَعَاقِبُهُم, and is your passing, meaning the next world. لَيْسَتْ فِي الْمَشْيِ عَلَى عِوَجِ. Literally translated, it means it is not لَيْسَتْ فِي الْمَشْيِ, in walking عَلَى عِوَجِ, upon any crookedness. It is not in walking crookedness or crooked. What does that mean? It means this is a phrase, لَيْسَتْ فِي الْمَشْيِ عَلَى عِوَجِ. It's not crooked, means it's not that it's not random. Yeah, it's not random, and I'll explain what that means, inshallah. So firstly, وَمَعَايِشُهُمْ. Ma'ayish, as I said, means your the dunya. It means the dunya, meaning everything that you have in this dunya, be it your mata'im, which is the food that you eat, the clothing that you wear, every benefit that you everything that you benefit from in this world, these are all your ma'ayish, everything that ultimately helps you to live. Yeah. So he says, وَمَعَايِشُهُمْ, everything that you have in your life that helps you move forward as an individual, that makes you feel happy, makes you, your family, your children, your spouse, your siblings, your uncles and aunts and your neighbors, everyone that ultimately helps you, is part of that jigsaw that makes you feel complete. All of that is your ma'aish. It helps you move forward. وَعَوَاقِبُهُمْ, and the awaqib is the hereafter, meaning whether you have sa'ada or shiqawa, whether you are successful in the hereafter, or whether we're fortunate or whether we're unfortunate in the hereafter, whether we're the lucky ones or whether we are taken to task for the way we live our lives. Laysat fil mashi, that it's not ala iwaji, it's not crooked in any way, meaning none of this has happened by accident. None of this is broken. None of this is something that you've just stumbled upon. Yeah, iwaj is like stumbling upon something too. There is nothing that happens in this world that is happening by accident or by some crookedness, or everything happens by design, and that's why I call this couplet design, because everything has been designed into our lives through the irada muqaddara lillahi ta'ala. The divine irada, which is the want, and muqaddara, which has been decreed by God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is directed to us in every instant, every moment. Whatever meets us, whatever reaches us at the exact time it was always supposed to meet us and reach us. Yeah. في أوقاتها المخصوصة, that they were everything that reaches us happens to us at the exact time that they were always destined to reach us. كنزولهم وطلوعهم, and linking that back to the previous couplet, just like our success and our failures, all of these are those opportunities are, they are those instances, the instances where we either grab them with both hands, we grab them, or we fail. And then he used this metaphor of walking, because this idea of ithbatul mashi means everything, nothing happens by accident, and then yet he uses this metaphor of walking crooked as opposed to walking without any crookedness. What he means by that is, or what he's kind of directing us towards, is this idea that when you're walking towards something, there's direction, there's purpose, there's intent, and there is, so that confidence with which you strive towards a goal, right? So mashi here is about striving towards something, you're purposeful walking towards something. He says he uses this as a metaphor, because what he's telling us is this idea of walking crooked is to almost be dragged kicking and screaming, as opposed to doing, recognizing that every moment is an opportune moment that God created for you, for that moment to benefit from. And when you try to maximize in every of those moments, he says one of the commentators of this says it's to live out the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he said, "Ittaqullah wajmulu fi talab." That the hadith says, always be vigilant of God. Yeah. Now we should be looking at this with taqwa, and the way I've been translating it all along is vigilant of God, but this idea that God has a hand in everything that happens in every moment. So seeing God in everything in your life. So beginning to see God in everything in your life, or at least attempting it. If we translate it like this, then wattaqullah, this hadith, ittaqullah, be vigilant of God's hand in everything that happens in your life. Wajmulu fi talab, and when you have that, then always do your best, be the best that you can be. Yeah, from Jamil. Yeah, from Jamil. Be the best that you can be in seeking. Yeah, when you direct yourself towards something, be the best version of yourself when you direct yourself towards it. Yeah, be the best version of yourself when you direct. So if it's a difficulty that we're facing, how can you be the best version of yourself, the side of you that you'd want to be proud of looking back retrospectively, in terms of how you handled a situation? I know that's extremely difficult, but in the moment, but actually we're not supposed to be managing it in the moment. We should be preparing for it mentally, this we've got to minimally, the first step to improving our ability to cope is to recognize the fact that we have an ability to break. I think if you live in the world as though you're immortal, and we don't ever come to terms with our own mortality or the mortality of those that are around us, that if we live in the world feeling we're invincible and think that we'll never fail in life, then the sedma, the attack, the way you'll feel when you feel that when you have failure will be completely catastrophic. It will be destructive, because it's something that you never ever expected. However, if you live your life thankful for the fact that you haven't failed, or you haven't had the chance to fail, but appreciating that you can fail, then this iwaji, this enacting that hadith, is when you know that there's every chance that on the next occasion you can fail, then what you should do is everything that you put your mind to, you should put your heart into, and you should do, put the best version of yourself into it, the best that you can into every single thing that you do, not rely on the fact that you're just an intelligent person that you always pass, because that's the people it hits the hardest. Failure hits the hardest when you've never experienced failure before, because you've never learned to fathom that you can fail. But people who have failed a lot in life, they have two benefits. One is they learn how to manage failure, for the most part, and number two, they appreciate success. The two benefits that you have that come from not to accepting failure. And actually, one of the worst, the biggest, never failing, the hardest thing with never failing is you don't know how you're going to cope with failure. You just don't know. So therefore, you're not prepared at all for it. Right? So you have no idea how you'll fail until it happens. So there's a preparation that comes with when somebody's failed before. They have the preparation, they know how to manage it better the next time. That's not to say they'll probably fail catastrophically again the second time and the third time and the fourth time. It doesn't matter. The point is, if nothing else, they will become, you'll try different techniques each time, and eventually you will land on something that helps you get through, and that confidence boost will probably be the reason why that person succeeds. And actually, you can succeed many times over, and it could be a complete, fluke. It's only when you failed a few times that you learn what not to do, and then you realize what works and what doesn't work. So a balanced view of what works and what doesn't work is, so all the most successful people in the world will spend. There's that book. It takes 10,000 hours to master something. 10,000 hours to master something. And actually the truth is, because it takes 5,000 hours at least of failing it constantly. You spend the first 1,000 hours wondering why it is that you ever started it. You spend, when you get to about 2,000 hours, you're probably questioning what it is that you're doing and whether it's the right thing to do. And most will give up at that point. Most will never spend more than about 2,000 to 3,000 hours on anything in life. So the people that are 10,000 are the outlier. They're the people that get to the absolute. They will fight through every single wall that faces them because they believe in the goal so much, right? And a lot of those people, I guarantee you, a lot of those people are people who have failed many times in life. They're not people. Look, Richard Branson, not to get into, but Richard Branson failed many, many businesses before the most successful business in the world. Michael Jordan, he once said that I can tell you every single. How did you become successful? He remembers every single shot that he missed, because each of them meant something to him. Each of them was a wound, a battle scar that he carried, which meant that it motivated him to move forward and not allow that to happen again. People who, I know people who have got into, medical school the first time they've at the first attempt. And a lot of them have gone through. It's not people that have just started off thinking, yeah, I'm going to do medicine, it's easy for me, and just getting through and just passing medicine. It's not necessarily, and even those people who do that, funnily enough, the people that that come to mind are people who are not necessarily particularly happy about it because they don't feel tested. People who have really shown for me are the people who have probably not got into medicine and tried a different route, and really tried hard in it so that they can get the grades that they need to get into medicine. So that effort, that extra long scenic journey that you have to go on to be able to get to your end goal, just makes it just so much more worthwhile, and something you'll just never let go of. When you've really painstakingly worked for something, and you believed in it so much, and you've experienced failure so much, and you've been told that you'll never succeed so much, when all of these things are compounded into one person, what you have is somebody who is absolutely just nothing can defeat them, because that person has come to terms with defeat. That's the thing. When you come to terms with the sense of, I can be defeated, but I'm not going to let it get in my way. That's the power that we want to harness when it comes to even our turning to God, because we shouldn't let every sin get in the way of our repentance. We shouldn't just allow every mistake to just break us even more. What we should be doing is every single sin, every single error, every single fall should be a reminder, a battle scar of determination, of how we then become even more determined when we turn to God. And people who have, and then there's outliers, the people who are the outliers, the people who have done the 10,000 hours of failure and made mistakes over and over again, and they become those outliers that are in history, the people that we talk about, the people that we write about, the great saints of the past, the people who how many saints were born, were born perfect? They weren't. If you read about many of the great awliya that we hear about today, are people who started off on a very different path, in a very different pursuit, and they found guidance through some means or another, and they just were so they were so adamant that they were going to direct themselves towards God, that they spent the rest of their life in that repentance. And actually what they did was they used as a catapult the very sins that they've performed in their life became the very springboard that they needed to become even closer to God. People like Imam Busiri, we're going to the Burda, Sheikh Sajjad goes to the Burda every Saturday. Imam Busiri has his story of repentance, of redirecting himself towards the Prophet ﷺ and to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have Fudail ibn Iyad, who's a very, very famous mystic who lived a life of brigandry. He literally spent his days and his nights leading a tribe of people who terrorized the community, who made people, and how many people lost their lives because of them. What would happen is that they would have these people, highwaymen, that would be in pockets surrounding the desert for any city, kind of going in and out of that city. So any travelers that came, they just looted them. Anyone that left the city, they looted them. And then what people have to do is they have to plan their journey to avoid the likes of Fudail ibn Iyad, because if they got you, then that was it. They took everything that you had. Your life's earnings were used up. And they say Fudail ibn Iyad was his wake-up call was one day when he overheard a group of people talking about how they were going to split up and go take different journeys. And he suddenly realized, just in that one moment, that he had been living his whole life completely oblivious to the impact his behavior and the behavior of the people around him was having on these people's lives. It's very easy to pretend that I'll take your money and you'll just start again, right? And you can just drown that person out. There's no face to those individuals. You see, it's easy to commit a crime against a nameless, faceless victim. So what he did was, this one time when he was in disguise, he'd heard these people planning, and he saw how meticulously and how fearful they were, how meticulously they planned their journey, how they thought about their children and their wives, how people had to say goodbye to their wives so they can go take a different journey, how children may never see their father again, their parents again, because the route that they were taking was a lot longer and a lot more arduous, which meant that there was a chance that they may never get to where they needed to be. When he saw all of that, it completely destroyed him, because he realized the impact he was having on people's lives, and he changed his ways. There's another narration that once he fell in love with a woman, something he never expected. He would just sometimes climb this wall and just to be able to see her, and he's completely obsessed with this woman. But he realized that he was who he was. He was Fudail, and people were afraid of him, so he couldn't really do anything about it. He just chose the life he chose, and that meant he had to make certain sacrifices. And then then he heard this verse, Alam ya'ni lilladhina amanu an takhsha'a qulubuhum li dhikrillah, aw kama qala ta'ala. That he heard this verse, is it not time for those who believe in God that their hearts finally begin to fear God? And he said, when I heard that, it struck my heart as though God had revealed it for me. And he changed his entire life based on just that one moment. Now, for the rest of his life, he spent it. He spent it in worshiping God, but in trying to pay back and make up for the life that he spent wasting it. So there's a narration about him that he spent the next 20 years or so trying to raise whatever money he could so he can pay back any of his victims, that he could pay back the government and the people that he knew of that he had stolen from. And they say at the end of, once he paid it all back, he went to the judge and he says, now you can cut off my hands, because he'd atoned for the mistakes that he'd made, and he'd spent his life atoning for those mistakes. But when he felt like I'd paid it back, now it's God's turn, meaning now I have to atone before God and the Sharia to cut off my hands. So that's a narration about him. But there's many people that have lived through this sort of life of hardship, of difficulty, but also of sin, and they found their way back to God. But when they found their way back to God, rather than feeling despair because of that life, they are strengthened and they become battle hardened through that life. And it means that when they direct themselves towards God, that becomes ever more powerful, because it's a constant reminder for them that of what they used to be. ومعايشهم ومعاقبهم ليست في المشي على عوج. ليست في المشي على عوج, that there is nothing crooked in this world. There is nothing that's broken that isn't as it was supposed to be. And there's a verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الذي خلق سبع سماوات طباقا ما ترى في خلق الرحمن من تفاوت. This is also in Surah Mulk, where Allah also tells us, he says, he is the one who created the seven heavens in stages. He created them in stages. And you do not see in any of the creation of God, in the creation of the most merciful, actually the most merciful. So God specifically refers to himself here by his name Ar-Rahman, that you do not see in the creation of the heavens and the earth anything min tafawut, any contradiction, anything that seems out of place. And that's what he means by iwaj in the text. Iwaj is this crookedness, is the metaphor is using this idea of purposeful walking towards your goal. But actually it's a reference to this in Surah Mulk, which is that ma tara fi khalq ar-rahmani min tafawut, that you don't see anything broken, anything out of place in this world. Everything that happens for a reason. Everything that comes to you was always meant to come to you, and everything that misses you was always meant to miss you. But actually Surah Mulk has this additional bit where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, Farji al-basara hal tara min futur. And God says, so why don't you, as if to say to man, look, if you haven't noticed it, if you haven't noticed that everything in this world is perfect the way it was always supposed to be, if you've not noticed it, Farji al-basar, why don't you return your eye back to that, return your eye back. In other words, look again. Hal tara min futur? Do you see anything broken? Right? Futur here is the idea of there being a separation. And one way of looking at this, is many ways you can reflect on this verse. Is one way is to say the fact that we exist today is a miracle in itself, because every single one of us came from a successful X number of generations, and each of those, they had to be they had to have been able to have children, and then they have to have been able to live to adulthood and to nurture those children, and that continue unbroken up to now for us to be the way we are today. For us to exist today means that every single one of us had this unbroken ancestry for that to happen. If there was a single break, we just would not exist. So the fact that exists means that God it's as though to say, look, why don't you just look at your own life? Look at your own life and trace your own life back and ask yourself, how did you get here today? Whatever you have in life, whatever success that you've ever experienced in your life, stop and mind map it and ask yourself, what are the various sets of accidents that I choose to ignore? What are these various sets of accidents that necessarily had to happen in order for me to be successful? Right? So you can actually mind map this and start very simple. Start with you today, Like, who are the influences, or what are the influences around you, literally you in the middle, and everything that influences you immediately around you that allows you to be happy. Let's keep it, that helps with you being happy. Now that would be broke. You can split that into domains. So there'll be a personal domain about you and your immediate family. There'll be a domain in terms of your extended family. There'll be your friends, and maybe a couple of really close friends that you have. It may be your spouse. It may be your children. All of these are different domains that you can split that into. And for each of these, then you need to do that exercise again. What did it take for them to be in my life? So now, if you trace that, one domain would be, let's say, education. Now with education, you can ask yourself, well, how did I get to the school that I got to? What did it require for me to be able to have that? And then within that school, what necessarily had to happen in order for you to be successful? So, what class were you in? And everyone can probably relate to this in some way, but I'm sure when we went to school, there were classes that did particularly well, and people that were in those classes, even if they weren't particularly bright, they seem to excel. And there are other classes that actually weren't very good. It was almost like the school, the teachers decided, okay, those guys are going to bunch them together and just keep them well away from everybody else. If you end up in that class, then suddenly your chances dwindle significantly. So what did it take for you to be, and how much of that was down to skill, and how much of that was down to sheer accident? Just so if you trace that back to every single step, everything that you have in your life, and what you end up with is, or what you should end up with, is this huge mind map of interconnected influences that you've had. And if nothing else, one thing that should be stark from that, looking at that, is very little of your achievements in your life are down to your own work. Very little is actually, because that would be an endless map that goes back generations, because you don't know what your great grandfather or your great 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 grandfather had to go through in order for him to marry your great 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 grandmother, and the trials and tribulations they would have faced, and the community in which they grew up, and the number of children that may have passed away in order for one successful child, which would have been your great great grandfather or great great grandmother, and so on. We don't know all of those intimate details. We don't know them. And yet all of that would have unfolded, and all of this happened. And God says, if you cannot see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's work in your life, then just farji' al-basara hal tara min futur, look back, just look again and see. And then the Quran, the verse continues, that if you were to do that, that your eyesight would return back to you. Khasi'an wa huwa hasir, the Quran says. And then if you were to do that, if you were to just take that exercise, there's absolutely no doubt that your eyes would return back. Yeah. Yarji al-basara, that the فانقلب إليه البصر خاسئا وهو حسير, or كما قال. I've got to read the whole verse. So that your eyesight would return back to you, and it will be defeated, meaning it would have accepted that there's nothing in my life that I have that has any breakage in it. Everything has just worked so perfectly in order for me to be the way I am today, and to have everything that I have in my life today. And that kind of that forces you into a state of gratitude, that you have to be grateful when you find these things. And I think that's one of that's the reason, as a reflection, that's the reason why God chooses to use his name Ar-Rahman in this verse. Allah says, الَّذِي خَلَقَ سَبْعَ سَمَاوَاتٍ طِبَاقًا, and then he says, مَا تَرَى فِي خَلْقِ الرَّحْمَانِ, you do not see in the creation of Ar-Rahman, because what we see is the Rahmaniyya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the compassion of God that plays out in our life beyond our immediate lives. It plays out throughout history in order for us to have everything that we have today. The poet then says, Ibn Nahwi then says, حِكَمًا نُسِجَتْ بِيَدٍ حَكَمَتْ ثُمَّ انْتَسَجَتْ بِالْمُنْتَسِجِ. So وَمَعَائِشُهُمْ وَمَعَاقِبُهُمْ لَيْسَتْ فِي الْمَشْيِ عَلَى إِوَجِ. حِكَمٌ نُسِجَتْ بِيَدٍ حَكَمَتْ ثُمَّ انْتَسَجَتْ بِالْمُنْتَسِجِ. This I've called this the hand of fate. This is, and I think we've already been speaking about this. So we'll just quickly continue on with that, inshallah, and then we'll stop. Hikamun nusijat, every hikam, every wisdom that is in your life, every hikam, every hikmah, hikam is the plural of hikmah. Nusijat, every wisdom has been weaved. Nasaja means to weave something, yeah, like sewing. Hikamun nusijat, wisdoms have been weaved, biyadin, by a hand, hakamat, that has decreed. That the wisdom of God has been weaved into your life by the hand of God that has decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ثم انتسجت بالمنتسج, and then it has been sown, it's been finalized. Muntasaj, intasaja means nasja shay, fantasaj. It means something is sown. So when you sow something, then what that product looks like at the end, once you've completely finished it, that's the muntasaj. Yeah. So he says, fantasajat, and then it was completed. This blanket, right? This perfect weaved design of our life, that is our life, has been completed, it has been finished, bil muntasiji, by, it's been completed by the one who weaves. The hand of the weaver has weaved. Yeah. So he is again extending this metaphor of nothing is by accident, that there is no crookedness in your life. It's not like you have kind of stumbled upon hardship or stumbled upon something good in your life. Yes, much of what you have is not of your own making. Much of the good that you have in your life has been a combination of a series of what appear to be accidents, which in reality are the hand of God at play. That there have been a number of things that are not of your doing, and yet have given you the leg up to be successful and to be happy. And then within that there have been there's been a smattering of hardships that we've had in our life in the grand scheme of things. And all of this has not happened by accident. All of this has been weaved into this great kind of tapestry of our life that's unique to each and every one of us. So he's calling us to just be mindful of the fact that, look, why should we be grateful to Allah for the times when they're good? Is because very little of that good is down to your own work. It's because God's rahmah has been at play here, and you need to be grateful for the fact that's happened. And why should we be grateful and yet patient when we have hardship? It's because in the great tapestry of your life, your hardship plays a very small part. For most of us, it plays a very small part, especially if we factor in all the good things that we don't necessarily consider to be blessings. They play a very small part, and actually the gratitude should be in appreciating that all of this buffer that God created to allow us to get through the hardship is part by his rahmaniyah. It's by his hand, and it was deliberate, and it was there to protect us. And if we turn our attention to all the good things that surround these dark spots, then what that means is that we can overcome those hardships. And it's a time of patience, because the patience is in recognizing that each of these dark spots are just temporary, that they are surrounded by these a sea of everything that's good in our life. And what we'll do is very quickly we'll climb out of it. And not only will we climb out of it, through our own doing, is that life will take us in that direction. Because when you fall into, going back to one of his metaphors, that when you fall into a ditch, when you fall down into, when you're in the depths of the valley, when the ocean of barakah, of ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes, it carries the people that are lowest in the ground first, and it carries them up to the surface with everybody else. So when God's ni'mah comes, he will scoop you up first. Right? He will scoop you up first. Every wisdom has been weaved into our life by the hand of fate, which has been sown by the weaver, that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فإذا اقتصدت ثم انعرجت فبمقتصد وبمنعرج. فإذا اقتصدت ثم انعرجت, and then this next couplet, which is couplet 11, is accepting fate. Right? It's called accepting fate. So a lot of this we've already talked about, but I want to follow through with each of these couplets, inshallah. فإذا اقتصدت, so when it appears that there is this iqtisad means when things are measured, when everything seems to be perfectly proportioned the way it should have been proportioned, everything is happening as it ought to have happened. ثم انعرجت, and then as if by as if catching you by surprise, things all of a sudden take a turn. Right? So when everything is measured and life in normality is just normality, and then suddenly things change. فإذا اقتصدت ثم انعرجت فبمقتصد وبمنعرج. Know that each of those was meant to be. Yeah. فبمقتصد وبمنعرج. He says, then it is by the measured times are through the deliberate is deliberate. It was supposed to be when life is supposed to just be, just kind of flowing, gently, then that's the way it was supposed to be. And when you suddenly hit the turbulence, then that was the way it was supposed to be. So one way to look at that is we can go through, you can go through life kind of sailing on very comfortable waters, but you can't allow it to make you complacent. What you can't allow that to do is to give you the false sense of security that because the waters are comfortable to navigate now, that they will always be that way. And yet we do that with life. If we were actually manning a ship, or we were driving a car and the road was just straight, endlessly straight, what you can do is you can fall asleep. But what you would never deliberately do is to believe that somehow that will ever come to it, that will never end. You just wouldn't do it. There would always be there's something that instigates you to just constantly be vigilant, just in case things change. So life is a bit like that. That you have to accept that we are driving. We're driving a vehicle, and it happens to be that this vehicle is most of the time it's going down a straight road that seems to be never ending, and there's no turbulence, right? But our experience tells us that every now and again the bend comes when you least expect it. So we should live our life expecting the bend. We should be completely aware and conscious and expect that there will be a bend, rather than believe that there won't and then be shocked when it happens. Because sometimes you can be, just to kind of really take this metaphor home, is that it may be that you catch the bend when you didn't expect it, but most of us don't catch the bend, and we kind of completely kind of veer off the road. For that means completely falling apart. Whereas if you're vigilant and you're aware of it, then at least you're prepared. You see it coming from a distance away. What that gives you is a chance to prepare and to kind of navigate yourself through it. That's not to say that's a guarantee that somehow you'll overcome it. There's no guarantees in life. But between being aware and accepting and believing that somehow this road will never have a bend in it, there will be no difficulties in your life. I know who I'd hedge my bets on if I was to pick one of those. فإذا اقتصدت ثم انعرجت فبمقتصد وبمنعرج. When times appear measured and deliberate, and then at once everything changes, know that each was meant to be. So we'll stop there, inshallah. So from next week we will continue from number 12, which I've called the signs of God, and we'll try and do 2 to 3 couplets next week, inshallah. So we're kind of moving away from that first segment of the Munfarijah now, and we're going to move towards the second segment of the Munfarijah. I'll speak a bit about that, inshallah, next week. I hope it's been of benefit, some use, inshallah. And if nothing else, it's a chance for us to just reflect on these things. So we'll stop there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.